St. Ives Part 2 by Robert Louis Stevenson. Chapter 27. The Sabbath Day. It was indeed high time I should be gone from Swanston, but what I was to do in the meanwhile was another question. Rowley had received his orders last night. He was to say that I had met a friend, and Mrs. McRankin was not to expect me before morning. A good enough tale in itself, but the dreadful pickle I was in made it out of the question. I could not go home till I had found harbourage, a fire to dry my clothes at, and the bed where I might lie till they were ready. Fortune favoured me again. I had scarce got to the top of the first hill when I spied a light on my left, about a furlong away. It might be a case of sickness. What else it was likely to be in so rustic a neighbourhood, and at such an ungodly time of the morning, was beyond my fancy. A faint sound of singing became audible, and gradually swelled as I drew near, until at last I could make out the words, which were singularly appropriate both to the hour and to the condition of the singers. "The cock may craw, the day may daw," they sang, and sang it with such laxity both in time and tune, and such sentimental complacence in the expression, as assured me they had got far into the third bottle at least. I found a plain rustic cottage by the wayside, of the sort called double, with a signboard over the door, and, the lights within streaming forth and somewhat mitigating the darkness of the morning, I was enabled to decipher the inscription, "The Hunter's Tryst, by Alexander Hendry, Porter Ales, and British Spirits, Beds." My first knock put a period to the music, and a voice challenged tipsily from within, "Who goes there?" it said, and I replied, "A lawful traveller." Immediately after, the door was unbarred by a company of the tallest lads my eyes had ever rested on, all astonishingly drunk and very decently dressed, and one who was perhaps the drunkest of the lot carrying a tallow candle, from which he impartially bedewed the clothes of the whole company. As soon as I saw them, I could not help smiling to myself to remember the anxiety with which I had approached. They received me and my hastily concocted story, that I had been walking from Peebles and had lost my way, with incoherent benignity, jostled me among them into the room where they had been sitting, a plain hedgerow alehouse parlour, with a roaring fire in the chimney and a prodigious number of empty bottles on the floor, and informed me that I was made, by this reception, a temporary member of the 6 Feet High Club, an athletic society of young men in a good Zygor-Sastruk or a refriquidqunden resort. They told me I had intruded on an all-night sitting, following upon an all-day Saturday tramp of 40 miles, and that the members would all be up and as right as 9 pence for the noonday service at some neighbouring church, Collingwood, if memory serves me right. At this I could have laughed, but the moment seemed ill chosen, for though 6 feet was their standard, they all exceeded that measurement considerably, and I tasted again some of the sensations of childhood as I looked up to all these lads from a lower plane and wondered what they would do next. But the 6-footers, if they were very drunk, proved no less kind. The landlord and servants of the Hunter's Tryst were in bed and asleep long ago. Whether by natural gift or acquired habit, they could suffer pandemonium to reign all over the house, and yet lie ranked in the kitchen like Egyptian mummies, only that the sound of their snoring rose and fell ceaselessly like the drone of a bagpipe. Here the 6-footers invaded them in their citadel, so to speak, counted the bunks and the sleepers, proposed to put me in bed to one of the lasses, proposed to have one of the lasses out to make room for me, fell over chairs, and made noise enough to waken the dead, the whole illuminated by the same young torchbearer, but now with 2 candles, and rapidly beginning to look like a man in a snowstorm. At last a bed was found for me. My clothes were hung out to dry before the parlour fire, and I was mercifully left to my repose. I awoke about 9, with the sun shining in my eyes. The landlord came at my summons, brought me my clothes dried and decently brushed, and gave me the good news that the 6 Feet High Club were all abed and sleeping off their excesses. where they were bestowed was a puzzle to me until, as I was strolling about the garden patch waiting for breakfast, I came on a barn door and, looking in, saw all the red face mixed in the straw-like plums in a cake. Quoth the stalwart maid, who brought me my porridge and bade me eat them while they were hot, "Aye, they were on the randan last nicht. Hout, they're fine lads, and they'll be nane the war of it. Forby Farby's coat. I dinna see was to get the creesh off that," she added with a sigh, in which, identifying Forbes as the torchbearer, I mentally joined. It was a brave morning when I took the road. The sun shone, spring seemed in. The air, it smelt like April or May, and some overventurous birds sang in the coppices as I went by. I had plenty to think of, plenty to be grateful for that gallant morning, and yet I had a twitter at my heart. To enter this city by daylight might be compared to marching on a battery. Every face that I confronted would threaten me like the muzzle of a gun, and it came into my head suddenly with how much better a countenance I should be able to do it if I could but improvise a companion. Hard by Merchiston, I was so fortunate as to observe a bulky gentleman in broadcloth and gaiters, stooping with his head almost between his knees before a stone wall. Seizing occasion by the forelock, I drew up as I came alongside and inquired what he had found to interest him. He turned upon me a countenance not much less broad than his back. "Why, sir," he replied, "I was even marveling at my own indefeasible stupidity that I should walk this way every week of my life, weather permitting, and should never before have noticed that stone," touching it at the same time with a goodly oak staff. I followed the indication. The stone, which had been built sideways into the wall, offered traces of heraldic sculpture. At once there came a wild idea into my mind. His appearance tallied with Flora's description of Mr. Robbie. A knowledge of heraldry would go far to clinch the proof, and what could be more desirable than to scrape an informal acquaintance with the man whom I must approach next day with my tale of the drovers, and whom I yet wished to please? I stooped in turn. "A chevron," I said, "on a chief 3 mullets, looks like Douglas, does it not?" "Yes, sir, it does." "You are right," said he. "It does look like Douglas, though without the tinctures, and the whole thing being so battered and broken up, who shall venture an opinion? But allow me to be more personal, sir. In these degenerate days, I am astonished you should display so much proficiency. Oh, I was well grounded in my youth by an old gentleman, a friend of my family, and I may say my guardian," said I, "but I have forgotten it since. God forbid I should delude you into thinking me a herald, sir. I am only an ungrammatical amateur. And a little modesty does no harm even in a herald," says my new acquaintance graciously. In short, we fell together on our onward way, and maintained very amicable discourse along what remained of the country road, past the suburbs, and on into the streets of the new town, which was as deserted and silent as a city of the dead. The shops were closed, no vehicle ran, cats sported in the midst of the sunny causeway, and our steps and voices re-echoed from the quiet houses. It was the high water, full and strange, of that weekly trance to which the city of Edinburgh is subjected, the apotheosis of the Sabbath. And I confess the spectacle wanted not grandeur, however much it may have lacked cheerfulness. There are few religious ceremonies more imposing. As we thus walked and talked in a public seclusion, the bells broke out ringing through all the bounds of the city, and the streets began immediately to be thronged with decent churchgoers. "Ah," said my companion, "there are the bells. Now, sir, as you are a stranger, I must offer you the hospitality of my pew. I do not know whether you are at all used with our Scottish form, but in case you are not, I will find your places for you. And Dr. Henry Gray, of St. Mary's, under whom I sit, is as good a preacher as we have to show you." This put me in a quandary. It was a degree of risk I was scarce prepared for. Dozens of people who might pass me by in the street with no more than a second look would go on from the second to the third, and from that to a final recognition. If I were set before them, immobilized in a pew during the whole time of service, an unlucky turn of the head would suffice to arrest their attention. Who is that? They would think, surely I should know him. And, a church being the place in all the world where one has least to think of, it was 10 to 1 they would end by remembering me before the benediction. However, my mind was made up. I thanked my obliging friend and placed myself at his disposal. Our way now led us into the northeast quarter of the town, among pleasant new Fulbergs, to a decent new church of a good size, where I was soon seated by the side of my good Samaritan and looked upon by a whole congregation of menacing faces. At first the possibility of danger kept me awake, but by the time I had assured myself there was none to be apprehended, and the service was not in the least likely to be enlivened by the arrest of a French spy, I had to resign myself to the task of listening to Dr. Henry Gray. As we moved out, after this ordeal was over, my friend was at once surrounded and claimed by his acquaintances of the congregation, and I was rejoiced to hear him addressed by the expected name of Robbie. So soon as we were clear of the crowd, "Mr. Robbie?" said I, bowing. "The very same, sir," said he. "If I mistake not, a lawyer?" "A writer to His Majesty's signet, at your service. It seems we were predestined to be acquaintances," I exclaimed. "I have here a card in my pocket intended for you. It is from my family lawyer. It was his last word as I was leaving to ask to be remembered kindly, and to trust you would pass over so informal an introduction." And I offered him the card. "Aye, aye, my old friend Daniel," says he, looking on the card. "And how does my old friend Daniel?" I gave a favorable view of Mr. Romaine's health. "Well, this is certainly a whimsical incident," he continued, "and since we are thus met already and so much to my advantage, the simplest thing will be to prosecute the acquaintance instantly. Let me propose a snack between sermons, a bottle of my particular green seal, and when nobody is looking, we can talk Blazons, Mr. Ducey," which was the name I then used and had already incidentally mentioned in the vain hope of provoking a return in kind. "I beg your pardon, sir. Do I understand you to invite me to your house?" said I. "That was the idea I was trying to convey," said he. "We have the name of hospitable people up here, and I would like you to try mine." "Mr. Robbie, I shall hope to try it some day, but not yet," I replied. "I hope you will not misunderstand me. My business, which brings me to your city, is of a peculiar kind. Till you shall have heard it, and, indeed, till its issue is known, I should feel as if I had stolen your invitation." "Well, well," said he, a little sobered, "it must be as you wish, though you would hardly speak otherwise if you had committed homicide. Mine is the loss. I must eat alone. A very pernicious thing for a person of my habit of body. Content myself with a pint of skinking claret, and meditate the discourse. But about this business of yours, if it is so particular as all that, it will doubtless admit of no delay." "I must confess, sir, it presses," I acknowledged. "Then let us say tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning," said he. "And I hope, when your mind is at rest and it does you much honor to take it as you do, that you will sit down with me to the postponed meal, not forgetting the bottle. You have my address," he added, and gave it me, which was the only thing I wanted. At last, at the level of York Place, we parted with mutual civilities, and I was free to pursue my way through the mobs of people returning from church to my lodgings in St. James's Square. Almost at the house door, whom should I overtake but my landlady in a dress of gorgeous severity, and dragging a prize in her wake, no less than Rowley, with the cockade in his hat and a smart pair of tops to his boots. When I said he was in the lady's wake, I spoke but in metaphor. As a matter of fact, he was squiring her with the utmost dignity on his arm, and I followed them up the stairs, smiling to myself, Both were quick to salute me as soon as I was perceived, and Mrs. McRankin inquired where I had been. I told her boastfully, giving her the name of the church and the divine, and ignorantly supposing I should have gained caste. But she soon opened my eyes. In the roots of the Scottish character there are knots and contortions that not only no stranger can understand, but no stranger can follow. He walks among explosives, and his best course is to throw himself upon their mercy, just as I am, without one plea, a citation from one of the lady's favorite hymns. The sound she made was unmistakable in meaning, though it was impossible to be written down, and I at once executed the maneuver I have recommended. "You must remember I am a perfect stranger in your city," said I. "If I have done wrong, it was in mere ignorance, my dear lady, and this afternoon, if you will be so good as to take me, I shall accompany you." But she was not to be pacified at the moment, and departed to her own quarters, murmuring. "Well, Raleigh," said I, "and have you been to church?" "If you please, sir," he said. "Well, you have not been any less unlucky than I have," I returned. "And how did you get on with the Scottish form?" "Well, sir, it was pretty hard, the form was, and rehether narrow," he replied. "I don't know we it is, but it seems to me like as if things were a good bit changed since William Wallace." That was a main queer church she took me to, Mr. Ann. I don't know as I could have sat it out, if she 'ad give me peppermints. She ain't a bad one at bottom, the old girl. She do pounce a bit and she do worry, but law bless you, Mr. Ann, it ain't no think, really she don't mean it. Why, she was down on me like 100 weight of bricks this morning. You see, last night she 'ad me in to supper, and I beg your pardon, sir, but I took the freedom of playing her a tune or two. She didn't mind a bit. So this morning I began to play to myself, and she flounced in and flew up, and carried on no end about Sunday. "You see, Rowley," said I, "they're all mad up here, and you have to humor them. See and don't quarrel with Mrs. McRankin. And above all, don't argue with her, or you'll get the worst of it. Whatever she says, touch your forelock and say, 'If you please,' or 'I beg pardon, ma'am.' And let me tell you one thing, I am sorry, but you have to go to church with her again this afternoon. That's duty, my boy." As I had foreseen, the bells had scarce begun before Mrs. McRankin presented herself to be our escort, upon which I sprang up with readiness, and offered her my arm. Raleigh followed behind. I was beginning to grow accustomed to the risks of my stay in Edinburgh, and it even amused me to confront a new churchful. I confess the amusement did not last until the end, for if Dr. Gray were long, Mr. McCraw was not only longer, but more incoherent, and the matter of his sermon, which was a direct attack, apparently, on all the churches of the world, my own among the number, where it had not the tonic quality of personal insult, rather inclined me to slumber. But I braced myself for my life, kept up Raleigh with the end of a pin, and came through it awake, but no more. Bethia was quite conquered by this mark of grace, though I am afraid she was also moved by more worldly considerations. The first is, the lady had not the least objection to go to church on the arm of an elegantly dressed young gentleman, and be followed by a spruce servant with a cockade in his hat. I could see it by the way she took possession of us, found us the places in the Bible, whispered to me the name of the minister, passed us lozenges, which I for my part handed on to Rowley, and at each fresh attention stole a little glance about the church to make sure she was observed. Raleigh was a pretty boy. You will pardon me if I also remembered that I was a favorable-looking young man. When we grow elderly, how the room brightens, and begins to look as it ought to look, on the entrance of youth, grace, health, and comeliness. You do not want them for yourself, perhaps not even for your son, but you look on smiling, and when you recall their images again, it is with a smile. I defy you to see or think of them and not smile with an infinite and intimate, but quite impersonal, pleasure. Well, either I know nothing of women, or that was the case with Bethia McRankin. She had been to church with a cockade behind her on the one hand, on the other, her house was brightened by the presence of a pair of good-looking young fellows of the other sex, who were always pleased and deferential in her society and accepted her views as final. These were sentiments to be encouraged, and, on the way home from church, if church it could be called, I adopted a most insidious device to magnify her interest. I took her into the confidence, that is, of my love affair, and I had no sooner mentioned a young lady with whom my affections were engaged than she turned upon me a face of awful gravity. "Is she bonny?" she inquired. I gave her full assurances upon that. "To what denomination does she belong?" came next, and was so unexpected as almost to deprive me of breath. "Upon my word, ma'am, I have never inquired," cried I. "I only know that she is a heartfelt Christian, and that is enough." "Ay," she sighed, "if she has the root of the mater. There's a remnant practically in most of the denominations. There's some in the Maglashonites, and some in the Glassites, and Mauney in the Macmillanites, and there's a leaven in the establishment. I have known some very good papists even, if you go to that," said I. "Mr. Dane me, Ducey, think shame to your soul," she cried. "Why, my dear madam, I began. "You shouldn't adjust in serious matters," she interrupted. On the whole, she entered into what I chose to tell her of our idyll with avidity, like a cat licking her whiskers over a dish of cream, and strange to say, and so expansive a passion is that of love, that I derived a perhaps equal satisfaction from confiding in that breast of iron. It made an immediate bond. From that hour we seemed to be welded into a family party, and I had little difficulty in persuading her to join us and to preside over our tea table. Surely there was never so ill-matched a trio as Rowley, Mrs. McRankin, and the Viscount Anne. But I am of the Apostle's way, with a difference, all things to all women. When I cannot please a woman, hang me in my cravat. Chapter 28. Events of Monday. The Lawyer's Party. By 8:30 on the next morning, I was ringing the bell of the lawyer's office in Castle Street, where I found him ensconced at a business table in a room surrounded by several tiers of green tin cases. He greeted me like an old friend. "Come away, sir, come away," said he. "Here is the dentist ready for you, and I think I can promise you that the operation will be practically painless." "I am not so sure of that, Mr. Robbie," I replied as I shook hands with him. "But at least there shall be no time lost with me. I had to confess to having gone a-roving with a pair of drovers and their cattle, to having used a false name, to having murdered or half-murdered a fellow creature in a scuffle on the moors, and to having suffered a couple of quite innocent men to lie some time in prison on a charge from which I could have immediately freed them. All this I gave him first of all, to be done with the worst of it, and all this he took with gravity, but without the least appearance of surprise. "Now, sir," I continued, "I expect to have to pay for my unhappy frolic, but I would like very well if it could be managed without my personal appearance, or even the mention of my real name. I had so much wisdom as to sail under false colors in this foolish jaunt of mine. My family would be extremely concerned if they had wind of it. But at the same time, if the case of this Faw has terminated fatally, and there are proceedings against Todd and Candlish, I am not going to stand by and see them vexed, far less punished, and I authorize you to give me up for trial if you think it best, or if you think it unnecessary, in the meanwhile to make preparations for their defense. I hope, sir, that I am as little anxious to be quixotic as I am determined to be just." "Very fairly spoken," said Mr. Robbie. "It is not much in my line, as doubtless your friend Mr. Romaine will have told you. I rarely mix myself up with anything on the criminal side, or approaching it. However, for a young gentleman like you, I may stretch a point, and I dare say I may be able to accomplish more than perhaps another. I will go at once to the Procurator Fiscal's office and inquire." "Wait a moment, Mr. Robbie," said I. "You forget the chapter of expenses." I had thought for a beginning of placing £1,000 in your hands. My dear sir, you will kindly wait until I render you my bill, said Mr. Robbie severely. It seemed to me, I protested, that coming to you almost as a stranger and placing in your hands a piece of business so contrary to your habits some substantial guarantee of my good faith. Not the way that we do business in Scotland, sir, he interrupted with an air of closing the dispute. And yet, Mr. Robbie, I continued, I must ask you to allow me to proceed. I do not merely refer to the expenses of the case. I have my eye, besides, on Todd and Candlish. They are thoroughly deserving fellows. They have been subjected through me to a considerable term of imprisonment, and I suggest, sir, that you should not spare money for their indemnification. This will explain, I added smiling, my offer of the £1,000. It was in the nature of a measure by which you should judge the scale on which I can afford to have this business carried through. I take you perfectly, Mr. Ducey, said he, but the sooner I am off, the better this affair is like to be guided. My clerk will show you into the waiting room and give you the day's Caledonian Mercury and the last register to amuse yourself. Within the interval, I believe Mr. Robbie was at least 3 hours gone. I saw him descend from a cab at the door, and almost immediately after I was shown again into his study, where the solemnity of his manner led me to augur the worst. For some time he had the inhumanity to read me a lecture as to the incredible silliness, not to say immorality, of my behavior. I have the satisfaction in telling you my opinion, because it appears that you are going to get off scot-free, he continued, where, indeed, I thought he might have begun. The man, Faw, has been discharged, cured, and the 2 men, Todd and Candlish, would have been liberated long ago if it had not been for their extraordinary loyalty to yourself, Mr. Ducey, or Mr. St. Ivy, as I believe I should now call you. Never a word would either of the 2 old fools volunteer that in any manner pointed at the existence of such a person, and when they were confronted with Faw's version of the affair, they gave accounts so entirely discrepant with their own former declarations, as well as with each other, that the fiscal was quite nonplussed, and imagined there was something behind it. You may believe I soon laughed him out of that, and I have the satisfaction of seeing your 2 friends set free, and very glad to be on the causeway again. Oh, sir, I cried, you should have brought them here. No instructions, Mr. Ducey, said he. How did I know you wished to renew an acquaintance which you had just terminated so fortunately? And indeed, to be frank with you, I should have set my face against it, if you had. Let them go. They are paid and contented, and have the highest possible opinion of Mr. St. Vi. When I gave them £50 apiece, which was rather more than enough, Mr. Ducey, whatever you may think, the man Todd, who had the only tongue of the party, struck his staff on the ground. Weel, says he. Aye, said he, was a gentleman. Man, Todd, said I, that was just what Mr. St. Ivy said of yourself. So it was a case of compliments fly when gentlefolk meet. No, Mr. Ducey, man Todd and man Candlish are gone out of your life, and a good riddance. They're fine fellows in their way, but no proper associates for the like of yourself. And do you finally agree to be done with all eccentricity? Take up with no more drovers or tinkers, but enjoy the natural pleasures for which your age, your wealth, your intelligence, and if I may be allowed to say it, your appearance, so completely fit you. And the first of these, quoth he, looking at his watch, will be to step through to my dining room and share a bachelor's luncheon. Over the meal, which was good, Mr. Robbie continued to develop the same theme. You're, no doubt, what they call a dancing man, said he. Well, on Thursday night there is the Assembly Ball. You must certainly go there, and you must permit me, besides, to do the honors of the Ciety and send you a ticket. I am a thorough believer in a young man being a young man, but no more drovers or rovers, if you love me. Talking of which puts me in mind that you may be short of partners at the Assembly. "Oh, I have been young myself, and if ye care to come to anything so portentously tedious as a tea-party at the house of a bachelor lawyer, consisting mainly of his nieces and nephews, and his grandnieces and grandnephews, and his wards, and generally the whole clan of the descendants of his clients, you might drop in tonight towards 7 o'clock. I think I can show you one or two that are worth looking at, and you can dance with them later on at the assembly." He proceeded to give me a sketch of one or two eligible young ladies whom I might expect to meet. "And then there's my particular friend, Miss Flora," said he. "But I'll make no attempt of a description. You shall see her for yourself." It will be readily supposed that I accepted his invitation, and returned home to make a toilette worthy of her I was to meet, and the good news of which I was the bearer. The toilette, I have reason to believe, was a success. Mr. Raleigh dismissed me with a farewell. "Crikey, Mr. Anne, but you do look prime." Even the stony Bethia was, how shall I say, dazzled but scandalized by my appearance, and while, of course, she deplored the vanity that led to it, she could not wholly prevent herself from admiring the result. "Ay, Mr. Ducey, this is a poor employment for a wayfaring Christian man," she said. "With a Christ despised and rejected in all parts of the world, and the flag of the covenant flung doon, you will be muckle better on your knees. However, I'll have to confess that it sets you weel, and if it's the lassie you're gone to see the nicht, I suppose I'll just have to excuse ye. Bairns, maun be bairns," she said with a sigh. "I mind when Mr. McGrankin came courtin', and that's lang by gane, I mind I had a green gown, pacemontet, that was thought to become me too." Admiration. I was nae just exactly what you would ca' bonny, but I was pale, penetratin', and interestin', and she leaned over the stair rail with a candle to watch my descent as long as it should be possible. It was but a little party at Mr. Robbie's, by which I do not so much mean that there were few people, for the rooms were crowded, as that there was very little attempted to entertain them. In one apartment there were tables set out, where the elders were solemnly engaged upon whist. In the other and larger one, a great number of youth of both sexes entertained themselves languidly, the ladies sitting upon chairs to be courted, the gentlemen standing about in various attitudes of insinuation or indifference. Conversation appeared the sole resource, except in so far as it was modified by a number of keepsakes and annuals which lay dispersed upon the tables, and of which the young beaux displayed the illustrations to the ladies. Mr. Robbie himself was customarily in the card-room. Only now and again, when he cut out, he made an incursion among the young folks, and rolled about jovially from one to another, the very picture of the general uncle. It chanced that Flora had met Mr. Robbie in the course of the afternoon. "Now, Miss Flora," he had said, "come early, for I have a phoenix to show you one Mr. Ducey, a new client of mine that I vow I have fallen in love with," and he was so good as to add a word or two on my appearance, from which Flora conceived a suspicion of the truth. She had come to the party in consequence, on the knife edge of anticipation and alarm, had chosen a place by the door, where I found her, on my arrival, surrounded by a posse of vapid youths, and, when I drew near, sprang up to meet me in the most natural manner in the world, and, obviously, with a prepared form of words. "How do you do, Mr. Ducey?" she said. "It is quite an age since I have seen you." "I have much to tell you, Miss Gilchrist," I replied. "May I sit down?" For the artful girl, by sitting near the door, and the judicious use of her shawl, had contrived to keep a chair empty by her side. She made room for me, as a matter of course, and the youths had the discretion to melt before us. As soon as I was once seated, her fan flew out, and she whispered behind it, "Are you mad?" "Madly in love," I replied, "but in no other sense. I have no patience." "You cannot understand what I am suffering," she said. "What are you to say to Ronald, to Major Chevenix, to my aunt?" "Your aunt?" I cried with a start. "Bacavie, is she here?" "She is in the card-room at West," said Flora. where she will probably stay all the evening?" I suggested. "She may," she admitted. "She generally does." "Well then, I must avoid the card room," said I, which is very much what I had counted upon doing. I did not come here to play cards, but to contemplate a certain young lady to my heart's content, if it can ever be contented, and to tell her some good news. "But there are still Ronald and the Major," she persisted. "They are not card-room fixtures. Ronald will be coming and going. And as for Mr. Chavinix, he always sits with Miss Flora," I interrupted. "And they talk of poor St. Ives? I had gathered as much, my dear, and Mr. Ducey has come to prevent it. But pray dismiss these fears. I mind no one but your aunt." "Why my aunt?" "Because your aunt is a lady, my dear, and a very clever lady, and, like all clever ladies, a very rash lady," said I. "You can never count upon them, unless you are sure of getting them in a corner, as I have got you, and talking them over rationally, as I am just engaged on with yourself. It would be quite the same to your aunt to make the worst kind of a scandal, with an equal indifference to my danger, and to the feelings of our good host." "Well," she said, "and what of Ronald then? Do you think he is above making a scandal? You must know him very little." "On the other hand, it is my pretension that I know him very well," I replied. "I must speak to Ronald. First, not Ronald to me, that is all." "Then please go and speak to him at once," she pleaded. "He is there, do you see, at the upper end of the room, talking to that girl in pink." "And so lose this seat before I have told you my good news?" I exclaimed. "Catch me. And, besides, my dear one, think a little of me and my good news." I thought the bearer of good news was always welcome. I hoped he might be a little welcome for himself. "Consider, I have but one friend, and let me stay by her, and there is only one thing I care to hear, and let me hear it." "Oh, Anne," she sighed, "if I did not love you, why should I be so uneasy? I am turned into a coward, dear. Think, if it were the other way round, if you were quite safe and I was in, oh, such danger!" She had no sooner said it than I was convicted of being a dullard. "God forgive me, dear." I made haste to reply. I never saw before that there were two sides to this, and I told her my tale as briefly as I could, and rose to seek Ronald. "You see, my dear, you are obeyed," I said. She gave me a look that was a reward in itself, and as I turned away from her, with a strong sense of turning away from the sun, I carried that look in my bosom like a caress. The girl in pink was an arch, ogling person with a good deal of eyes and teeth, and a great play of shoulders and rattle of conversation. There could be no doubt, from Mr. Ronald's attitude, that he worshipped the very chair she sat on. But I was quite ruthless. I laid my hand on his shoulder as he was stooping over her like a hen over a chicken. "Excuse me for one moment, Mr. Gilchrist," said I. He started and span about in answer to my touch, and exhibited a face of inarticulate wonder. "Yes," I continued, "it is even myself. Pardon me for interrupting so agreeable a tete-a-tete, but you know, my good fellow, we owe a first duty to Mr. Robbie. It would never do to risk making a scene in the man's drawing-room, so the first thing I had to attend to was to have you warned. The name I go by is Ducey, too, in case of accidents." I say, you know," cried Ronald. "Deuce take it, what are you doing here?" "Hush, hush," said I. "Not the place, my dear fellow, not the place. Come to my rooms if you like, tonight after the party, or tomorrow in the morning, and we can talk it out over a sagar. But here, you know, it really won't do at all." Before he could collect his mind for an answer, I had given him my address in St. James Square, and had again mingled with the crowd. Alas, I was not fated to get back to Flora so easily. Mr. Robbie was in the path, he was insatiably loquacious, and as he continued to palaver, I watched the insipid youths gather again about my idol, and cursed my fate and my host. He remembered suddenly that I was to attend the assembly ball on Thursday, and had only attended tonight by way of a preparative. This put it into his head to present me to another young lady. But I managed this interview with so much art that, while I was scrupulously polite and even cordial to the fair one, I contrived to keep Robbie beside me all the time, and to leave along with him when the ordeal was over. We were just walking away arm in arm when I spied my friend the Major approaching, stiff as a ramrod and, as usual, obtrusively clean. "Oh, there's a man I want to know," said I, taking the bull by the horns. "Won't you introduce me to Major Chevenix?" "At a word, my dear fellow," said Robbie. "And Major," he cried, "come here and let me present to you my friend Mr. Ducey, who desires the honor of your acquaintance." The Major flushed visibly, but otherwise preserved his composure. He bowed very low. "I'm not very sure," he said. "I have an idea we have met before?" "Informally," I said, returning his bow. "And I have long looked forward to pleasure of regularizing our acquaintance." "You are very good, Mr. Ducey," he returned. "Perhaps you could aid my memory a little. Where was it that I had the pleasure?" "Oh, that would be telling tales out of school," said I with a laugh, "and before my lawyer, too." "I'll wager," broke in Mr. Robbie, "that when you knew my client, Chevenix, the past of our friend Mr. Ducey is an obscure chapter full of horrid secrets. I'll wager, now, you knew him as Saint Ivy," says he, nudging me violently. "I think not, sir," said the Major with pinched lips. "Well, I wish he may prove all right," continued the lawyer, with certainly the worst inspired jocularity in the world. "I know nothing by him. He may be a swell mobsman for me with his aliases. You must put your memory on the rack, Major, and when you've remembered when and where you met him, be sure you tell me." "I will not fail, sir," said Chevenix. "Seek to him," cried Robbie, waving his hand as he departed. The Major, as soon as we were alone, turned upon me his impassive countenance. "Well," he said, "you have courage." "It is undoubted as your honor, sir," I returned, bowing. "Did you expect to meet me, may I ask?" said he. "You saw at least that I courted the presentation," said I. "And you were not afraid?" said Chevenix. I was perfectly at ease. I knew I was dealing with a gentleman, be that your epitaph. "Well, there are some other people looking for you," he said, "who will make no bones about the point of honor. The police, my dear sir, are simply agog about you." "And I think that that was coarse," said I. "You have seen Miss Gilchrist?" he inquired, changing the subject, "with whom I am led to understand we are on a footing of rivalry." I asked. "Yes, I have seen her, and I was just seeking her," he replied. I was conscious of a certain thrill of temper. So, I suppose, was he. We looked each other up and down. "The situation is original," he resumed. "Quite," said I. "But let me tell you frankly you were blowing a cold coal. I owe you so much for your kindness to the prisoner Champdivers." "Meaning that the lady's affections are more advantageously disposed of?" he asked with a sneer. "Thank you, I am sure. And, since you have given me a lead, just hear a word of good advice in your turn. Is it fair? Is it delicate? Is it like a gentleman to compromise the young lady by attentions which, as you know very well, can come to nothing?" I was utterly unable to find words in answer. "Excuse me if I cut this interview short," he went on. "It seems to me doomed to come to nothing, and there is more attractive metal." "Yes," I replied. "As you say, it cannot amount to much. You are impotent, bound hand and foot in honor. You know me to be a man falsely accused, and even if you did not know it, from your position as my rival, you have only the choice to stand quite still or to be infamous." "I would not say that," he returned, with another change of color. "I may hear it once too often." With which he moved off straight, for where Flora was sitting amidst her court of vapid youths, and I had no choice but to follow him. A bad second, and reading myself, as I went, a sharp lesson on the command of temper. It is a strange thing how young men in their teens go down at the mere wind of the coming of men of 25 and upwards. The vapid ones fled without thought of resistance before the Major and me. A few dallied a while in the neighborhood, so to speak, with their fingers in their mouths, but presently these also followed the rout, and we remained face to face before Flora. There was a draught in that corner by the door. She had thrown her pelisse over her bare arms and neck, and the dark fur of the trimming set them off. She shone by contrast. The light played on her smooth skin to admiration, and the color changed in her excited face. For the least fraction of the second she looked from one to the other of her pair of rival swains, and seemed to hesitate. Then she addressed Chevenix. "You are coming to the assembly, of course, Mater Chevenix," said she. "I fear not. I fear I shall be otherwise engaged," he replied. "Even the pleasure of dancing with you, Miss Flora, must give way to duty." For a while the talk ran harmlessly on the weather, and then branched off towards the war. It seemed to be by no one's fault. It was in the air and had to come. "Good news from the scene of operations," said the Major. "Good news while it lasts," I said. "But will Miss Gilchrist tell us her private thought upon the war? In her admiration for the victors, does not there mingle some pity for the vanquished?" "Indeed, sir," she said with animation, "only too much of it. War is a subject that I do not think should be talked of to a girl. I have to be, what do you call it, a non-combatant? And to remind me of what others have to do and suffer, no, it is not fair." "Miss Gilchrist has the tender female heart," said Chevenix. "Do not be too sure of that," she cried. "I would love to be allowed to fight myself." "On which side?" I asked. "Can you ask?" she exclaimed. "I am a Scottish girl. She is a Scottish girl," repeated the Major, looking at me. "And no one grudges you her pity." "And I glory in every grain of it she has to spare," said I. "Pity is akin to love." "Well, and let us put that question to Miss Gilchrist. It is for her to decide, and for us to bow to the decision. Is pity, Miss Flora, or is admiration nearest love?" "Oh, come," said I, "let us be more concrete. Lay before the lady a complete case. Describe your man, then I'll describe mine, and Miss Flora shall decide." "I think I see your meaning," said he, "and I'll try. You think that pity and the kindred sentiments have the greatest power upon the heart. I think more nobly of women. To my view, the man they love will first of all command their respect. He will be steadfast proud, if you please. Dry, possibly, but of all things steadfast. They will look at him in doubt. At last they will see that stern face which he presents to all the rest of the world, softened to them alone. First, trust, I say. It is so that a woman loves who is worthy of heroes." "Your man is very ambitious, sir," said I, "and very much of a hero. Mine is a humbler, and I would fain think a more human dog. He is one with no particular trust in himself, with no superior steadfastness to be admired for, who sees a lady's face, who hears her voice, and, without any phrase about the matter, falls in love. What does he ask for then, but pity? Pity for his weakness, pity for his love, which is his life. You would make women always the inferiors, gaping up at your imaginary lover. He, like a marble statue, with his nose in the air. But God has been wiser than you, and the most steadfast of your heroes may prove human after all. We appeal to the Queen for judgment," I added, turning and bowing before Flora. "And how shall the Queen judge?" she asked. "I must give you an answer that is no answer at all. The wind bloweth where it listeth. She goes where her heart goes." Her face flushed as she said it, mine also, for I read in it a declaration, and my heart swelled for joy. But Chevenix grew pale. "You make of life a very dreadful kind of lottery, ma'am," said he, "but I will not despair. Honest and unornamental is still my choice. and I must say he looked extremely handsome and very amusingly like the marble statue with its nose in the air to which I had compared him. "I cannot imagine how we got upon this subject," said Flora. "Madam, it was through the war," replied Chevenix. "All roads lead to Rome," I commented. "What else would you expect Mr. Chevenix and myself to talk of?" About this time I was conscious of a certain bustle and movement in the room behind me, but did not pay to it that degree of attention which perhaps would have been wise. There came a certain change in Flora's face. She signaled repeatedly with her fan. Her eyes appealed to me obsequiously. There could be no doubt that she wanted something as well as I could make out, that I should go away and leave the field clear for my rival, which I had not the least idea of doing. At last she rose from her chair with impatience. "I think it time you were saying good night, Mr. Ducie," she said. I could not in the least see why, and said so. Whereupon she gave me this appalling answer: "My aunt is coming out of the card room." In less time than it takes to tell, I had made my bow and my escape. Looking back from the doorway, I was privileged to see, for a moment, the august profile and gold eyeglasses of Miss Gilchrist issuing from the card room, and the sight lent me wings. I stood not on the order of my going, and a moment after I was on the pavement of Castle Street, and the lighted windows shone down on me, and were crossed by ironical shadows of those who had remained behind. Chapter 29. Immersive Tuesday, the toils closing. This day began with a surprise. I found a letter on my breakfast table addressed to Edward Ducie, Esquire, and at first I was startled beyond measure. Conscience doth make cowards of us all. When I had opened it, it proved to be only a note from the lawyer, enclosing a card for the assembly ball on Thursday evening. Shortly after, as I was composing my mind with a Sager at one of the windows of the sitting room, and Raleigh, having finished the light share of work that fell to him, sat not far off tootling with great spirit and a marked preference for the upper octave, Ronald was suddenly shown in. I got him a cigar, drew in a chair to the side of the fire, and installed him there, I was going to say, at his ease, but no expression could be farther from the truth. He was plainly on pins and needles, did not know whether to take or to refuse the Sager, and, after he had taken it, did not know whether to light or to return it. I saw he had something to say. I did not think it was his own something, and I was ready to offer a large bet it was really something of Major Chevenix's. "Well, and so here you are," I observed, with pointless cordiality, for I was bound I should do nothing to help him out. If he were indeed here running errands for my rival, he might have a fair field, but certainly no favor. "The fact is," he began, "I would rather see you alone." "Why, certainly," I replied. "Rowley, you can step into the bedroom." "My dear fellow," I continued, "this sounds serious. Nothing wrong, I trust." "Well, I'll be quite honest," said he. "I am a good deal bothered. And I bet I know why," I exclaimed. "And I bet I can put you to rights, too." "What do you mean?" he asked. "You must be hard up," said I. "And all I can say is, you've come to the right place. If you have the least use for £100, or any such trifling sum as that, please mention it. It's here, quite at your service." "I am sure it is most kind of you," said Ronald. "And the truth is, though I can't think how you guessed it, that I really am a little behind board. But I haven't come to talk about that." "No, I dare say," cried I. "Not worth talking about. But remember, Ronald, you and I are on different sides of the business. Remember that you did me one of those services that make men friends forever. And since I've had the fortune to come into a fair share of money, just oblige me, and consider so much of it as your own." "No," he said, "I couldn't take it. I couldn't, really. Besides, the fact is I've come on a very different matter. It's about my sister St. Ives," and he shook his head menacingly at me. "You're quite sure?" I persisted. "It's here, at your service up to £500 if you like. Well, all right. Only remember where it is when you do want it. Oh, please let me alone, cried Ronald. I've come to say something unpleasant, and how on earth can I do it if you don't give a fellow a chance? It's about my sister, as I said. You can see for yourself that it can't be allowed to go on. It's compromising. It don't lead to anything, and you're not the kind of man you must feel it yourself that I can allow my female relatives to have anything to do with. I hate saying this, St. Ives. It looks like hitting a man when he's down, you know. And I told the Major I very much disliked it from the first. However, it had to be said, and now it has been, and, between gentlemen, it shouldn't be necessary to refer to it again. It's compromising, it doesn't lead to anything. Not the kind of man, I repeated. Thoughtfully, yes, I believe I understand, and shall make haste to put myself en règle. I stood up and laid my cigar down. Mr. Ridgeon. Gilchrist, said I with a bow, in answer to your very natural observations, I beg to offer myself as a suitor for your sister's hand. I am a man of title, of which we think lightly in France, but of ancient lineage, which is everywhere prized. I can display 32 quarterings without a blot. My expectations are certainly above the average. I believe my uncle's income averages about £30,000, though I admit I was not careful to inform myself. Put it anywhere between 15 and 50,000. It is certainly not less. All this is very easy to say, said Ronald, with a pitying smile. Unfortunately, these things are in the air. Pardon me, in Buckinghamshire, said I, smiling. Well, what I mean is, my dear St. Ives, that you can't prove them, he continued. They might just as well not be. Do you follow me? You can't bring us any third party to back you. Oh, come, cried I, springing up and hurrying to the table. You must excuse me. I wrote Romayne's address. There is my reference, Mr. Gilchrist. Until you have written to him and received his negative answer, I have a right to be treated, and I shall see that you treat me as a gentleman. He was brought up with a round turn at that. I beg your pardon, St. Ives, said he. Believe me, I had no wish to be offensive. But there's the difficulty of this affair. I can't make any of my points without offense. You must excuse me, it's not my fault. But at any rate, you must see for yourself this proposal of marriage is merely impossible, my dear fellow. It's nonsense. Our countries are at war. You are a prisoner. My ancestor of the time of the Ligue, I replied, married a Huguenot lady out of the Saintonge, riding 200 miles through an enemy's country to bring off his bride, and it was a happy marriage. Well, he began, and then looked down into the fire and became silent. Well, I asked. Well, there's this business of Goglat, said he, still looking at the coals in the grate. What? I exclaimed, starting in my chair. What's that you say? This business about Goglat, he repeated. Ronald, said I, this is not your doing. These are not your own words. I know where they came from. A coward put them in your mouth. St. Ives, he cried, why do you make it so hard for me? And where's the use of insulting other people? The plain English is that I can't hear of any proposal of marriage from a man under a charge like that. You must see it for yourself, man. It's the most absurd thing I ever heard of. And you go on forcing me to argue with you too. Because I have had an affair of honor which terminated unhappily, you a young soldier, or next door to it refuse my offer? Do I understand you aright, said I, my dear fellow? He wailed. Of course you can twist my words if you like. You say it was an affair of honor. Well, I can't of course tell you that I can't. I mean, you must see that that's just the point. Was it? I don't know. I have the honor to inform you, said I. Well, other people say the reverse, you see. They lie, Ronald, and I will prove it in time. The short and the long of it is that any man who is so unfortunate as to have such things said about him is not the man to be my brother-in-law, he cried. Do you know who will be my first witness at the court? Arthur Chevenix, said I. I don't care, he cried, rising from his chair and beginning to pace outrageously about the room. What do you mean, St. Ives? What is this about? It's like a dream, I declare. You made an offer, and I have refused it. I don't like it, I don't want it, and whatever I did or didn't wouldn't matter. My aunt wouldn't bear of it anyway. Can't you take your answer, man? You must remember, Ronald, that we are playing with edged tools, said I. An offer of marriage is a delicate subject to handle. You have refused, and you have justified your refusal by several statements. First, that I was an impostor. Second, that our countries were at war. And third, no, I will speak, said I. You can answer when I have done. And third, that I had dishonorably killed, or was said to have done so, the man Gogolot. Now, my dear fellow, these are very awkward grounds to be taking. From anyone else's lips I need scarce tell you how I should resent them, but my hands are tied. I have so much gratitude to you, without talking of the love I bear your sister, that you insult me, when you do so, under the cover of a complete impunity. I must feel the pain, and I do feel it acutely. I can do nothing to protect myself. He had been anxious enough to interrupt me in the beginning, but now, and after I had ceased, he stood a long while silent. St. Mice? Ives, he said at last, I think I had better go away. This has been very irritating. I never at all meant to say anything of the kind, and I apologize to you. I have all the esteem for you that one gentleman should have for another. I only meant to tell you to show you what had influenced my mind, and that in short. The thing was impossible. One thing you may be quite sure of, I shall do nothing against you. Will you shake hands before I go away? He blurted out. Yes, said I. I agree with you, the interview has been irritating. Let bygones be bygones. Goodbye, Ronald. Goodbye, Sartles, he returned. I'm heartily sorry. And with that he was gone. The windows of my own sitting room looked towards the north, but the entrance passage drew its light from the direction of the square. Hence I was able to observe Ronald's departure, his very disheartened gait, and the fact that he was joined about halfway by no less a man than Major Chevenix. At this I could scarce keep from smiling. So unpalatable an interview must be before the pair of them, and I could hear their voices, clashing like crossed swords, in that eternal antiphony of I told you and I told you not. Without doubt, they had gained very little by their visit, but then I had gained less than nothing, and had been bitterly dispirited into the bargain. Ronald had stuck to his guns and refused me to the last. It was no news, but, on the other hand, it could not be contorted into good news. I was now certain that during my temporary absence in France, all irons would be put into the fire, and the world turned upside down, to make Flora disown the obtrusive Frenchman and accept Chevenix. Without doubt she would resist these instances, but the thought of them did not please me, and I felt she should be warned and prepared for the battle. It was no use to try and see her now, but I promised myself early that evening to return to Swanston. In the meantime I had to make all my preparations, and look the coming journey in the face. Here in Edinburgh I was within 4 miles of the sea, yet the business of approaching random fishermen with my hat in the one hand and a knife in the other appeared so desperate that I saw nothing for it but to retrace my steps over the northern counties and knock a second time at the doors of Burchell Fen. To do this, money would be necessary, and after leaving my paper in the hands of Flora, I had still a balance of about £1,500. Or rather, I may say I had them and I had them not, for after my luncheon with Mr. Robbie, I had placed the amount, all but £30 of change, in a bank in George Street, on a deposit receipt in the name of Mr. Raleigh. This I had designed to be my gift to him in case I must suddenly depart. But now, thinking better of the arrangement, I dispatched my little man, cockade and all, to lift the 1,500. He was not long gone, and returned with a flushed face and the deposit receipt still in his hand. "No go, Mr. Ann," says he. "How's that?" I inquired. "Well, sir, I found the place all right, and no mistake," said he, "but I tell you what gave me a blue fright. There was a customer standing by the door, and I recognized him. Who do you think it was, Mr. Ann? Why, that same redbreast him I had breakfast with near Aylesbury." "You're sure you are not mistaken?" I asked. "Certain sure," he replied. "Not Mr. Lavender, I don't mean, sir. I mean the other party." "What's he doing here?" says I. "It don't look right." "Not by any means," I agreed. I walked to and fro in the apartment reflecting. This particular Bow Street runner might be here by accident, but it was to imagine a singular play of coincidence that he, who had met Raleigh and spoken with him in the Green Dragon, hard by Aylesbury, should be now in Scotland, where he could have no legitimate business, and by the doors of the bank where Raleigh kept his account. "Raleigh," said I, "he didn't see you, did he?" "Never a fear," quoth Raleigh. "Why, Mr. Ann, sir, if he 'ad you wouldn't have seen me any more." "I ain't a hasses, sir." "Well, my boy, you can put that receipt in your pocket. You'll have no more use for it till you're quite clear of me. Don't lose it, though. It's your share of the Christmas box, £1,500, all for yourself." "Begging your pardon, Mr. Ann, sir, but what for?" said Raleigh. "To set up a public house upon," said I. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I ain't got any call to set up a public house, sir," he replied stoutly. "And I tell you what, sir, it seems to me I'm reether young for the billet. I'm your body servant, Mr. Ann, or else I'm nothink." "Well, Raleigh," I said, "I'll tell you what it's for. It's for the good service you have done me, of which I don't care and don't dare to speak. It's for your loyalty and cheerfulness, my dear boy. I had meant it for you, but to tell you the truth, it's past mending now. It has to be yours. Since that man is waiting by the bank, the money can't be touched until I'm gone." "Until you're gone, sir," re-echoed Raleigh. "You don't go anywheres without me. I can tell you that, Mr. Ann, sir." "Yes, my boy," said I. "We are going to part very soon now, probably tomorrow, and it's for my sake, Raleigh. Depend upon it, if there was any reason at all for that Bow Street man being at the bank, he was not there to look out for you. How they could have found out about the account so early is more than I can fathom. Some strange coincidence must have played me false. But there the fact is, and Raleigh, I'll not only have to say farewell to you presently, I'll have to ask you to stay indoors until I can say it. Remember, my boy, it's only so that you can serve me now." "Why, sir, you say the word, and of course I'll do it," he cried. "Nothing by owls is my motto. I'm your man, through thick and thin, live or die I am." In the meantime there was nothing to be done till towards sunset. My only chance now was to come again as quickly as possible to speech of Flora, who was my only practicable banker, and not before evening was it worth while to think of that. I might compose myself as well as I was able over the Caledonian Mercury, with its ill news of the campaign of France and belated documents about the retreat from Russia. And as I sat there by the fire, I was sometimes all awake with anger and mortification at what I was reading, and sometimes again I would be 3 parts asleep as I dozed over the barren items of home intelligence. Lately arrived, this is what I suddenly stumbled on. At Dumrex Hotel, the Viscount of St. Ives. "Raleigh," said I. "If you please, Mr. Ann, sir," answered the obsequious, lowering his pipe. "Come and look at this, my boy," said I, holding out the paper. "My cricky," said he. "That's him, sir, sure enough, Raleigh," said I. "He's on the trail. He has fairly caught up with us. He and this Bow Street man have come together, I would swear. And now here is the whole field, quarry, hounds and hunters, all together in this city of Edinburgh. And what are you going to do now, sir? Tell you what, let me take it in, and please, give me a minute, and I'll disguise myself, and go out to this hotel, leastways, sir, and see what he's up to. You put your trust in me, Mr. Ann. I'm fly, don't you make no mistake about it. I'm all a-growing and a-blowing, I am." "Not 1 foot of you," said I. "You are a prisoner, Rowley, and make up your mind to that. So am I, or next door to it. I showed it you for a caution. If you go on the streets, it spells death to me, Rowley." "If you please, sir," says Rowley. "Come to think of it," I continued, "you must take a cold or something. No good of awakening Mrs. McGraken's suspicions." "A cold!" he cried, recovering immediately from his depression. "I can do it, Mr. Ann." And he proceeded to sneeze and cough and blow his nose till I could not restrain myself from smiling. "Oh, I tell you, I know a lot of them dodges," he observed proudly. "Well, they come in very handy," said I. "I'd better go at once and show it to the old gal at Etnai," he asked. I told him by all means, and he was gone upon the instant, gleeful as though to a game of football. I took up the paper and read carelessly on, my thoughts engaged with my immediate danger, till I struck on the next paragraph. "In connection with the recent horrid murder in the castle, we are desired to make public the following intelligence. The soldier, Chapdivers, is supposed to be in the neighborhood of this city. He is about the middle height, or rather under, of a pleasing appearance and highly genteel address. When last heard of, he wore a fashionable suit of pearl gray and boots with fawn-colored tops. He is accompanied by a servant about 16 years of age, speaks English without any accent, and passed under the alias of Ramorny. A reward is offered for his apprehension." In a moment I was in the next room, stripping from me the pearl-colored suit. I confess I was now a good deal agitated. It is difficult to watch the toils closing slowly and surely about you, and to retain your composure, and I was glad that Raleigh was not present to spy on my confusion. I was flushed, my breath came thick. I cannot remember a time when I was more put out. And yet I must wait and do nothing, and partake of my meals, and entertain the ever garrulous Raleigh as though I were entirely my own man. And if I did not require to entertain Mrs. McGraken also, that was but another drop of bitterness in my cup. For what ailed my landlady, that she should hold herself so severely aloof, that she should refuse conversation, that her eyes should be reddened, that I should so continually hear the voice of her private supplications sounding through the house? I was much deceived, or she had read the insidious paragraph and recognized the comminated pearl gray suit. I remember now a certain air with which she had laid the paper on my table, and a certain sniff, between sympathy and defiance, with which she had announced it. "There's your Mercury for ye." In this direction, at least, I saw no pressing danger. Her tragic countenance betokened agitation. It was plain she was wrestling with her conscience, and the battle still hung dubious. The question of what to do troubled me extremely. I could not venture to touch such an intricate and mysterious piece of machinery as my landlady's spiritual nature. It might go off at a word, and in any direction, like a badly made firework. And while I praised myself extremely for my wisdom in the past, that I had made so much a friend of her, I was all abroad as to my conduct in the present. There seemed an equal danger in pressing and in neglecting the accustomed marks of familiarity. The one extreme looked like impudence and might annoy, the other was a practical confession of guilt. Altogether, it was a good hour for me when the dusk began to fall in earnest on the streets of Edinburgh, and the voice of an early watchman bade me set forth. I reached the neighborhood of the cottage before 7, and as I breasted the steep ascent which leads to the garden wall, I was struck with surprise to hear a dog. Dogs I had heard before, but only from the hamlet on the hillside above. Now, this dog was in the garden itself, where it roared aloud in paroxysms of fury, and I could hear it leaping and straining on the chain. I waited some while, until the brute's fit of passion had roared itself out. Then, with the utmost precaution, I drew near again, and finally approached the garden wall. So soon as I had clapped my head above the level, however, the barking broke forth again with redoubled energy. Almost at the same time, the door of the cottage opened, and Ronald and the Major appeared upon the threshold with a lantern. As they so stood, they were almost immediately below me, strongly illuminated, and within easy earshot. The Major pacified the dog, who took instead to low, uneasy growling intermingled with occasional yelps. "Good thing I brought Tozer," said Chevenix. "Damn him. I wonder where he is," said Ronald, and he moved the lantern up and down, and turned the night into a shifting puzzlework of gleam and shadow. "I think I'll make a sally." "I don't think you will," replied Chevenix. "When I agreed to come out here and do sentry go, it was on one condition, Master Ronald. Don't you forget that. Military discipline, my boy. Our beat is this path close about the house. Down." "Tozer, good boy, gently then," he went on, caressing his confounded monster. "To think, the beggar may be hearing us this minute," cried Ronald. "Nothing more probable," said the Major. "You there, St. Ives?" he added in a distinct but guarded voice. "I only want to tell you, you had better go home. Mr. Gilchrist and I take watch and watch. The game was up." "Beaucoup de plaisir," I replied in the same tones. "Il fait un peu froid pour veiller. Gardez-vous des enjôleurs." I suppose it was done in a moment of ungovernable rage, but in spite of the excellent advice he had given to Ronald the moment before, Chevenix slipped the chain, and the dog sprang, straight as an arrow, up the bank. I stepped back, picked up a stone of about 12 pounds weight, and stood ready. With a bound, the beast landed on the copestone of the wall, and almost in the same instant my missile caught him fair in the face. He gave a stifled cry, went tumbling back where he had come from, and I could hear the 12-pounder accompany him in his fall. Chevenix, at the same moment, broke out in a roaring voice, "The hell-hound! If he's killed my dog," and I judged upon all grounds it was as well to be off. Chapter 30. Events of Wednesday. The University of Cramond. I awoke to much diffidence, even to a feeling that might be called the beginnings of panic, and lay for hours in my bed considering the situation. Seek where I pleased, there was nothing to encourage me, and plenty to apple. They kept a close watch about the cottage. They had a beast of a watch-dog at least, unless I had settled it, and if I had, I knew its bereaved master would only watch the more indefatigably for the loss. In the pardonable ostentation of love I had given all the money I could spare to Flora. I had thought it glorious that the hunted exile should come down, like Jupiter, in a shower of gold and pour thousands in the lap of the beloved. Then I had in an hour of arrant folly buried what remained to me in a bank in George Street. And now I must get back the one or the other. And which? And how? As I tossed in my bed, I could see 3 possible courses, all extremely perilous. First, Raleigh might have been mistaken. The bank might not be watched. It might still be possible for him to draw the money on the deposit receipt. Second, I might apply again to Robbie. Or, third, I might dare everything, go to the Assembly Ball, and speak with Flora under the eyes of all Edinburgh. This last alternative, involving as it did the most horrid risks, and the delay of 48 hours, I did but glance at with an averted head, and turned again to the consideration of the others. It was the likeliest thing in the world that Robbie had been warned to have no more to do with me. The whole policy of the Gilchrists was in the hands of Chevenix, and I thought this was a precaution so elementary that he was certain to have taken it. If he had not, of course I was all right. Robbie would manage to communicate with Flora, and by 4 o'clock I might be on the South Road and, I was going to say, a free man. Lastly, I must assure myself with my own eyes whether the bank in George Street were beleaguered. I called to Rowley and questioned him tightly as to the appearance of the Bow Street officer. "What sort of looking man is he, Rowley?" I asked as I began to dress. "What sort of a looking man he is?" repeated Rowley. "Well, I don't very well know what you would say, Mr. Ann. He ain't a beauty any, ow. Is he tall?" "Tall? Well, no, I shouldn't say tall, Mr. Ann." "Well, then, is he short?" "Short? No, I don't think I would say he was what you would call short. No, not particular short, sir." "Then, I suppose, he must be about the middle height?" "Well, you might say it, sir, but not remarkable so." I smothered an oath. "Is he clean shaved?" I tried him again. "Clean shaved," he repeated with the same air of anxious candor. "Good heaven, man, don't repeat my words like a parrot," I cried. "Tell me what the man was like. It is of the first importance that I should be able to recognize him." "I'm trying to, Mr. Ann, but clean shaved? I don't seem to rightly get hold of that pint. Sometimes it might appear to me like as if he was, and sometimes like as if he wasn't. No, it wouldn't surprise me now if you was to tell me he 'ad a bit o' whisker. Was the man red-faced?" I roared, dwelling on each syllable. "I don't think you need go for to get cross about it, Mr. Ann," said he. "I'm tellin' you every blessed thing I see. Red-faced? Well, no, not as you remark upon." A dreadful calm fell upon me. "Was he anywise pale?" I asked. "Well, it don't seem to me as though he were, but I tell you truly, I didn't take much heed to that." "Did he look like a drinking man?" "Well, no, if you please, sir. He looked more like an eating one." "Oh, he was stout, was he?" "No, sir, I couldn't go so far as that." "No, he wasn't, not to say stout. If anything, lean rather." I need not go on with the infuriating interview. It ended as it began, except that Rowley was in tears and that I had acquired one fact. The man was drawn for me as being of any height you like to mention, and of any degree of corpulence or leanness, clean shaved or not, as the case might be, the color of his hair. Rowley could not take it upon himself to put a name on. That of his eyes he thought to have been blue, nay, it was the one point on which he attained to a kind of tearful certainty. "I'll take my Davy on it," he asseverated. They proved to have been as black as sloes, very little and very near together. So much for the evidence of the artless. And the fact, or rather the facts, acquired. Well, they had to do not with the person, but with his clothing. The man wore knee breeches and white stockings. His coat was some kind of a lightish color or betwixt that and dark, and he wore a moleskin waistcoat. As if this were not enough, he presently hailed me from my breakfast in a prodigious flutter and showed me an honest and rather venerable citizen passing in the square. "That's him, sir," he cried, "the very moral of him. Well, this one is better dressed, and pre-wraps a trifler taller, and in the face he don't favor him noways at all, sir. No, not when I come to look again, he don't seem to favor him noways. Jackass," said I, and I think the greatest stickler for manners will admit the epithet to have been justified. Meanwhile, the appearance of my landlady added a great load of anxiety to what I already suffered. It was plain that she had not slept, equally plain that she had wept copiously. She sighed, she groaned, she drew in her breath, she shook her head as she waited on table. In short, she seemed in so precarious a state, like a petard 3 times charged with hysteria, that I did not dare to address her, and stole out of the house on tiptoe, and actually ran downstairs in the fear that she might call me back. It was plain that this degree of tension could not last long. It was my first care to go to George Street, which I reached by good luck as a boy was taking down the bank shutters. A man was conversing with him. He had white stockings and a moleskin waistcoat, and was as ill-looking a rogue as you would want to see in a day's journey. This seemed to agree fairly well with Rowley's signalman. He had declared emphatically, if you remember, and had stuck to it besides, that the companion of the great lavender was no beauty. Thence I made my way to Mr. Robbie's, where I rang the bell. A servant answered the summons and told me the lawyer was engaged, as I had half expected. Way, shall I say, was callin', she pursued, and when I had told her, Mr. Ducey, I think this'll be for you then, she added and handed me a letter from the hall table. It ran, Dear M.R. Ducey, my single advice to you is to lead quam primum for the South. Yours, T.R.O.B.B.I.E. That was short and sweet. It emphatically extinguished hope in one direction. No more was to be gotten of Robbie, and I wondered, from my heart, how much had been told him. Not too much, I hoped, for I liked the lawyer who had thus deserted me, and I placed a certain reliance in the discretion of Chevenix. He would not be merciful. On the other hand, I did not think he would be cruel without cause. It was my next affair to go back along George Street and assure myself whether the man in the moleskin vest was still on guard. There was no sign of him on the pavement. Spying the door of a common stair nearly opposite the bank, I took it in my head that this would be a good point of observation, crossed the street, entered with a business-like air, and fell immediately against the man in the moleskin vest. I stopped and apologized to him. He replied in an unmistakable English accent, thus putting the matter almost beyond doubt. After this encounter, I must, of course, ascend to the top story, ring the bell of a suite of apartments, inquire for Mr. Vavasor, learn with no great surprise that he did not live there, come down again, and again politely saluting the man from Bow Street, make my escape at last into the street. I was now driven back upon the Assembly Ball. Robbie had failed me. The bank was watched. It would never do to risk Rowley in that neighborhood. All I could do was to wait until the morrow evening and present myself at the Assembly, let it end as it might. But I must say I came to this decision with a good deal of genuine fright, and here I came, for the first time, to one of those places where my courage stuck. I do not mean that my courage boggled and made a bit of a bother over it, as it did over the escape from the castle. I mean stuck, like a stopped watch or a dead man. Certainly I would go to the ball. Certainly I must see this morning about my clothes. That was all decided. But the most of the shops were on the other side of the valley in the old town, and it was now my strange discovery that I was physically unable to cross the North Bridge. It was as though a precipice had stood between us, or the deep sea had intervened. Nearer to the castle, my legs refused to bear me. I told myself this was mere superstition. I made wagers with myself and gained them. I went down on the esplanade of Prince's Street, walked and stood there, alone and conspicuous, looking across the garden at the old gray bastions of the fortress, where all these troubles had begun. I cocked my hat, set my hand on my hip, and swaggered on the pavement, confronting detection. And I found I could do all this with a sense of exhilaration that was not unpleasing, and with a certain crânerie of manner that raised me in my own esteem. And yet there was one thing I could not bring my mind to face up to, or my limbs to execute, and that was to cross the valley into the old town. It seemed to me I must be arrested immediately. If I had done so, I must go straight into the twilight of a prison cell, and pass straight thence to the gross and final embraces of the nightcap and the halter. And yet it was from no reasoned fear of the consequences that I could not go. I was unable. My horse balked, and there was an end. My nerve was gone. Here was a discovery for a man in such imminent peril, set down to so desperate a game, which I could only hope to win by continual luck and unflagging effrontery. The strain had been too long continued, and my nerve was gone. I fell into what they call panic fear, as I have seen soldiers do on the alarm of a night attack, and turned out of Prince's Street at random, as though the devil were at my heels. In St. Andrew's Square, I remember vaguely hearing someone call out. I paid no heed, but pressed on blindly. A moment after, a hand fell heavily on my shoulder, and I thought I had fainted. Certainly the world went black about me for some seconds, And when that spasm passed, I found myself standing face to face with the cheerful, extravagant, in what sort of disarray I really dare not imagine, dead white at least, shaking like an aspen, and mowing at the man with speechless lips. And this was the soldier of Napoleon and the gentleman who intended going next night to an assembly ball. I am the more particular in telling of my breakdown because it was my only experience of the sort, and it is a good tale for officers. I will allow no man to call me coward. I have made my proofs, few men more. And yet I come of the best blood in France, and inured to danger from a child did, for some 10 or 20 minutes, make this hideous exhibition of myself on the streets of the new town of Edinburgh. With my first available breath, I begged his pardon. I was of an extremely nervous disposition, recently increased by late hours. I could not bear the slightest start. He seemed much concerned. "You must be in a devil of a state," said he. "Though of course it was my fault, damnably silly, vulgar sort of thing to do. 1,000 apologies, but you really must be run down. You should consult a medico. My dear sir, a hair of the dog that bit you is clearly indicated. A touch of blue ruin now? Or, come, it's early, but is man the slave of hours? What do you say to a chop and a bottle in Dumb Rex Hotel?" I refused all false comfort, but when he went on to remind me that this was the day when the University of Cremond met, and to propose a 5-mile walk into the country and a dinner in the company of young asses like himself, I began to think otherwise. I had to wait until tomorrow evening at any rate. This might serve as well as anything else to bridge the dreary hours. The country was the very place for me, and walking is an excellent sedative for the nerves. Remembering poor Rowley, feigning a cold in our lodgings and immediately under the guns of the formidable and now doubtful Bethia, I asked if I might bring my servant. "Poor devil, it is dull for him," I explained. "The merciful man is merciful to his ass," observed my sententious friend. "Bring him by all means." The harp, his sole remaining joy, was carried by an orphan boy. And I have no doubt the orphan boy can get some cold victuals in the kitchen while the senatus dines. Accordingly, being now quite recovered from my unmanly condition, except that nothing could yet induce me to cross the North Bridge, I arranged for my ball dress at a shop in Leith Street, where I was not served ill, cut out Raleigh from his seclusion, and was ready along with him at the trysting place, the corner of Duke Street and York Place, by a little after 2. The university was represented in force, 11 persons, including ourselves, Byfield the aeronaut, and the tall lad, Forbes, whom I had met on the Sunday morning, bedewed with tallow, at the Hunter's Rest. I was introduced, and we set off by way of New Haven and the sea beach. At first through pleasant country roads, and afterwards along a succession of bays of a fairy-like prettiness, to our destination, Cremond on the Almond, a little hamlet on a little river, embowered in woods, and looking forth over a great flat of quicksand to where a little islet stood, planted in the sea. It was miniature scenery, but charming of its kind. The air of this good February afternoon was bracing, but not cold. All the way my companions were skylarking, jesting, and making puns, and I felt as if a load had been taken off my lungs and spirits, and skylarked with the best of them. Byfield, I observed, because I had heard of him before and seen his advertisements, not at all because I was disposed to feel interest in the man. He was dark and bilious and very silent, frigid in his manners, but burning internally with a great fire of excitement, and he was so good as to bestow a good deal of his company and conversation, such as it was, upon myself, who was not in the least grateful. If I had known how I was to be connected with him in the immediate future, I might have taken more pains. In the hamlet of Cramond there is a hostelry of no very promising appearance, and here a room had been prepared for us, and we sat down to table. Here you will find no guddling or gormandizing, no turtle or nightingale's tomkungs, said the extravagant, whose name, by the way, was Dalmahoy. The device, sir, of the University of Cramond is plain living and high drinking. Grace was said by the professor of divinity in a macaronic Latin, which I could by no means follow, only I could hear it rhymed, and I guessed it to be more witty than reverent. After which the senatus academicus sat down to rough plenty in the shape of rizzard haddocks and mustard, a sheep's head, a haggis, and other delicacies of Scotland. The dinner was washed down with brown stout in bottle, and as soon as the cloth was removed, glasses, boiling water, sugar, and whiskey were set out for the manufacture of toddy. I played a good knife, and fork did not shun the bowl and took part, so far as I was able, in the continual fire of pleasantry with which the meal was seasoned. Greatly daring, I ventured, before all these Scotsmen, to tell Sim's tale of Tweedy's dog, and I was held to have done such extraordinary justice to the dialect, for a Southron, that I was immediately voted into the chair of Scots and became, from that moment, a full member of the University of Cremond. A little after I found myself entertaining them with a song, and a little after, perhaps a little, in consequence it occurred to me that I had had enough, and would be very well inspired to take French leave. It was not difficult to manage, for it was nobody's business to observe my movements, and conviviality had banished suspicion. I got easily forth of the chamber, which reverberated with the voices of these merry and learned gentlemen, and breathed a long breath. I had passed an agreeable afternoon and evening, and I had apparently escaped scot-free. Alas! When I looked into the kitchen, there was my monkey, drunk as a lord, toppling on the edge of the dresser, and performing on the flageolet to an audience of the house lasses and some neighboring ploughmen. I routed him promptly from his perch, stuck his hat on, put his instrument in his pocket, and set off with him for Edinburgh. His limbs were of paper, his mind quite in abeyance. I must uphold and guide him, prevent his frantic dives, and set him continually on his legs again. At first he sang wildly, with occasional outbursts of causeless laughter. Gradually an inarticulate melancholy succeeded. He wept gently at times, would stop in the middle of the road, say firmly, "No, no, no," and then fall on his back, or else address me solemnly as Lord, and fall on his face by way of variety. I'm afraid I was not always so gentle with the little pig as I might have been, but really the position was unbearable. We made no headway at all, and I suppose we were scarce gotten a mile away from Cramond when the whole Senatus Academicus went pipal was heard hailing and doubling the pace to overtake its. Some of them were fairly presentable, and they were all Christian martyrs compared to Raleigh, but they were in a frolicsome and rollicking humor that promised danger as we approached the town. They sang songs, they ran races, they fenced with their walking sticks and umbrellas, and in spite of this violent exercise, the fun grew only the more extravagant with the miles they traversed. Their drunkenness was deep-seated and permanent, like fire in a peat, or rather, to be quite just to them, it was not so much to be called drunkenness at all, as the effective youth and high spirits, a fine night, and the night young, a good road underfoot, and the world before you. I had left them once somewhat unceremoniously. I could not attempt it a second time, and, burthened as I was with Mr. Raleigh, I was really glad of assistance. But I saw the lamps of Edinburgh draw near on their hilltop with a good deal of uneasiness, which increased, after we had entered the lighted streets, to positive alarm. All the passers-by were addressed, some of them by name. A worthy man was stopped by Forbes. "Sir," said he, "in the name of the Senatus of the University of Cremond, I confer upon you the degree of LL.D., and with the words he bonative. Conceive the predicament of St. Ives, committed to the society of these outrageous youths, in a town where the police and his cousin were both looking for him. So far we had pursued our way unmolested, although raising a clamor fit to wake the dead, but at last, in Abercrombie Place, I believe at least it was a crescent of highly respectable houses fronting on a garden. Byfield and I, having fallen somewhat in the rear with Raleigh, came to a simultaneous halt. Our ruffians were beginning to wrench off bells and door plates. "Oh, I say," says Byfield, "this is too much of a good thing. Confound it! I'm a respectable man, a public character, by George. I can't afford to get taken up by the police." "My own case exactly," said I. "Here, let's bilk them," said he. And we turned back and took our way downhill again. It was none too soon. Voices and alarm bells sounded. Watchmen here and there began to spring their rattles. It was plain the University of Cramond would soon be at blows with the police of Edinburgh. Byfield and I, running the semi-inanimate Rowley before us, made good dispatch, and did not stop till we were several streets away, and the hubbub was already softened by distance. "Well, sir," said he, "we are well out of that. Did ever anyone see such a pack of young barbarians?" "We are properly punished, Mr. Byfield. We had no business there," I replied. "No, indeed, sir, you may well say that. Outrageous! And my ascension announced for Friday, you know," cried the aeronaut. "A pretty scandal. Byfield the aeronaut at the police court. Tut, tut! Will you be able to get your rascal home, sir? Allow me to offer you my card. I am staying at Walker & Poole's Hotel, sir, where I should be pleased to see you." "The pleasure would be mutual, sir," said I, but I must say my heart was not in my words, and as I watched Mr. Byfield departing, I desired nothing less than to pursue the acquaintance. One more ordeal remained for me to pass. I carried my senseless load upstairs to our lodging, and was admitted by the landlady in a tall white nightcap and with an expression singularly grim. She lighted us into the sitting-room, where, when I had seated Raleigh in a chair, she dropped me a cast-iron courtesy. I smelt gunpowder on the woman. Her voice tottered with emotion. "I give you notice, Mr. Ducey," said she. "Decent folks' houses." And at that apparently temper cut off her utterance, and she took herself off without more words. I looked about me at the room, the goggling Rowley, the extinguished fire. My mind reviewed the laughable incidents of the day and night, and I laughed out loud to myself lonely and cheerless laughter. At this point, the author's MS breaks off. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed the journey, the characters, and the world they carried with them. If you enjoyed this audiobook, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment below. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more timeless books to be shared with listeners around the world. Until next time, thank you for listening.